Every Christmas I drove 5 hours to be invisible. This year was no different. I walked through my parents' front door carrying gifts I'd spent weeks choosing, and no one even looked up. My sister Emma was twirling in a new designer dress. My mother was adjusting her necklace. My father was pouring champagne. "Oh, you made it," Mum said, barely glancing over her shoulder. "Your old room is available?" That night during the gift exchange, my father cleared his throat and smiled. "This year presents are only for the successful children. We hope this motivates you, Sabrina." Emma laughed, fingering her diamond necklace. "Don't feel bad, sis. You can watch us open ours. That's fun too, right?" I sat there, silent, hands folded, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What they didn't know, what nobody at that table knew, was that my phone was about to buzz with an email that would change everything. And when my $780,000 bonus flashed across the living room TV screen, my sister's face went white. Have you ever been satisfying proven wrong by the people who underestimated you? My name is Sabrina Newton. I'm 36 years old, and I serve as Vice President of Financial Strategy at one of the largest tech companies in Cleveland. Last quarter, I led a $2 billion acquisition that made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. But to my family, I'm just the daughter who does some kind of bookkeeping work and never quite measured up. The drive from Cleveland to Columbus takes about 2.5 hours when the roads are clear. On Christmas Eve, with snow beginning to fall and holiday traffic crawling along the highway, it took me nearly 4. I spent every mile of it wondering why I still made this trip year after year, knowing exactly what waited for me at the end. My parents' house looked like something from a holiday catalogue. White lights traced every window. A wreath hung on the red front door. Through the frost-edged glass, I could see the warm glow of the fireplace and the massive Christmas tree my mother always insisted on. Picture perfect, postcard beautiful. And somehow, even from the driveway, I could feel how cold it would be inside for me. I grabbed my small suitcase and the bag of carefully wrapped gifts I'd spent weeks selecting. When I pushed open the front door, the scene inside was exactly what I expected. Emma, my younger sister, stood in the centre of the living room, wearing a stunning emerald dress, turning slowly while our parents admired her from the couch. Marcus, her boyfriend, was recording her on his phone, like she was walking a runway. My mother glanced over her shoulder when the cold air swept in behind me. She didn't get up. She didn't smile. She simply said, "Put your things in your old room." We set up the guest suite for Emma and Marcus. They needed more space. Then she turned back to watch Emma twirl. No one asked about my drive. No one asked about my work or my life in Cleveland. I carried my bags down the hallway alone, passing family photos, where Emma's face appeared in nearly every frame, while I seemed to fade into the background year after year. I was hanging up my coat when Emma appeared in my doorway. She leaned against the frame, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "So still doing that little bookkeeping thing?" she asked. "Cleveland must be brutal on that salary. I don't know how you manage." Before I could respond, she continued, her tone shifting to something almost rehearsed. "By the way, I reminded Mum and Dad that the lawyer is coming tomorrow night at 8. We're finalising some will updates. You know, just getting family affairs organised." She watched my face carefully as she said it, gauging my reaction. I gave her nothing. Later that evening, I found Grandma Grace sitting alone in the kitchen. She was 82 years old and often forgotten in the shuffle of our family gatherings. A cup of tea sat cold in front of her, but when she saw me, her whole face changed. She reached for my hand and held it tight. "I read about your company's acquisition last month," she whispered. $2 billion. You led that, didn't you?" I stared at her, stunned. She smiled softly. "I follow the financial news. It's the only way I know what's happening with you." Her grip tightened. "I've stayed silent too long about things in this house. This Christmas, I think it's time for truth." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked down the dark hallway toward the kitchen for water, and as I passed Emma's door, I heard her voice clearly through the thin wood. The lawyer comes at 8 tomorrow, she was saying to Marcus. Once Dad signs the new will, everything is locked in. Sabrina gets nothing, and honestly, she doesn't deserve anything. She's never contributed to this family. By this time, tomorrow, it'll all be official. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I turned to find Grandma Grace standing there in her robe, her eyes filled with sadness and something that looked like resolve. "You heard that, didn't you?" she said quietly. "Come with me. There are things I should have told you years ago." Grandma Grace led me to her small bedroom at the end of the hall. She closed the door softly behind us and sat on the edge of her bed, patting the space beside her. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. A single lamp cast warm shadows across her weathered face as she gathered her thoughts. "I should have spoken up years ago," she began, her voice heavy with regret. "After you graduated college and moved to Cleveland, things changed in this house. Emma started telling your parents stories about you. She said you were barely surviving on minimum wage. She told them you couldn't even afford to visit, that you were too proud to ask for help, but too unsuccessful to manage on your own." Grace shook her head slowly. "Your parents believed every word. They never called you to verify. They never asked you directly about your life. They just accepted what Emma told them as truth." I felt something cold settle in my chest. All those years of wondering why my parents looked at me with such disappointment, why they treated Emma like a golden child, while I seemed to fade further into the background with every visit. It had been manufactured, carefully constructed, a lie built brick by my own sister. "I wanted to correct them," Grandma continued, squeezing my hand. "But I was afraid of causing conflict. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I convinced myself things would work out eventually." Her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. "My silence was a terrible mistake. I let them treat you like a stranger in your own family home." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "There's something else that has puzzled me for years. Every month, $2,000 appears in the household account. Your parents believe it comes from your grandfather's pension, but Sabrina, his pension was only $800 a month. I never understood where the extra $1,200 came from." She looked at me with knowing eyes. "Until recently, when I started putting the pieces together." My heart stopped. She knew, or at least she suspected. For 8 years, I had been secretly sending money to help my parents, routing it through my grandfather's old account so they wouldn't feel embarrassed accepting help from their supposedly struggling daughter. Nearly $200,000 over the years, and they had no idea. It came from me. "We can talk more tomorrow," Grace said gently, "but I wanted you to know that I see you. I've always seen you. And tomorrow, I think it's time everyone else does too." I barely slept that night. My mind churned through memories and revelations, piecing together years of confusion into a painful new clarity. By the time weak winter sunlight began filtering through my window, I had made a decision. I would watch. I would wait. And when the moment was right, I would show them exactly who I really was. Christmas morning breakfast was a performance worthy of a stage. The dining table was set beautifully, with my mother's best china and fresh flowers. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. But beneath the holiday warmth, something felt rehearsed, calculated. My mother stood at the head of the table and cleared her throat. "Before we eat your father and I want to make an announcement. Tonight is important. The lawyer is coming at 8 to finalize some family documents." She smiled at Emma with obvious pride. "We want to make sure responsible family members are recognized properly, people who have shown loyalty and dedication to this family." My father nodded, his eyes moving between Emma and me. The approval in his gaze when he looked at my sister was unmistakable. The doubt when he glanced at me was equally clear. "Family assets should go to people who have proven they can be counted on," he said, people who show up, people who contribute. Emma nodded solemnly, the picture of the dutiful daughter. I think that's so wise, she said. Family should take care of family. That's what really matters. Throughout breakfast, Emma dominated the conversation. She talked endlessly about her incredible year at work, a minor promotion she described as a major breakthrough. She spoke about her failed coffee shop venture with surprising pride, calling it an entrepreneurial learning experience that made her stronger. She hinted at vague plans for a new business venture that would surely be successful this time. Our parents hung on every word, beaming with pride at their accomplished younger daughter. When my mother finally turned to me and asked politely about my work, Emma cut in before I could answer. She's still doing the same bookkeeping stuff, right? She smiled at me with practiced sweetness. That's totally fine. Not everyone needs to be ambitious. Some people are just steady. There's nothing wrong with that. I said nothing. I simply watched. And the more I watched, the more I noticed. Emma checked her phone constantly throughout the meal, texting someone with rapid fingers beneath the table. Every time anyone mentioned the lawyer or the documents, a flicker of tension crossed her face. Her laughter was a beat too loud. Her smiles held a second too long. Beneath her polished performance, my sister was managing something precarious, something that made her nervous. After breakfast, I helped my mother clear dishes from the table. As I gathered plates near Emma's chair, I noticed an envelope on the floor beneath her handbag. It must have fallen out when she grabbed her phone. I bent to pick it up, and the letterhead caught my eye immediately. Morrison and Clark Attorneys at Law. Below that in bold type, Last Will and Testament Revised Draft. My eyes moved down the page to a section highlighted in yellow. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sole beneficiary, Emma Marie Newton. And below, that partially visible before the fold, has demonstrated no financial contribution. Before I could read another word, Emma appeared at my side and snatched the envelope from my hands. Her face had gone completely white. Her eyes were wide with barely controlled panic. That's private, she said, her voice sharp. Family, legal stuff. Nothing you need to worry about. She shoved the envelope deep into her bag and walked away quickly, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and a terrible new understanding forming in my mind. This was not just about favoritism. This was not just about being overlooked. My sister was trying to erase me from my own family, and she had put it in writing. I watched Emma disappear down the hallway with that envelope clutched against her chest, and something shifted inside me. The confusion and hurt that had defined my relationship with my family for years began crystallizing into something sharper, something more dangerous. I was done being the victim of circumstances I didn't understand. It was time to find answers. That afternoon, while my parents napped and Emma busied herself with Marcus in the living room, I found Grandma Grace alone in the sunroom. She was pretending to read a book, but her eyes weren't moving across the pages. She looked up when I sat beside her, and I could see she had been waiting for me. "Grandma, I need to ask you something important," I said quietly, keeping my voice low enough that it wouldn't carry through the thin walls. "Over the past 5 years, have you ever received any emails from me, birthday messages, photos, updates about my life in Cleveland?" Grace's face fell. She set her book aside and shook her head slowly. "No, dear. I assumed you were too busy to write. Emma mentioned once that you're not much for keeping in touch. She said you preferred to keep your distance from the family." My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. I had sent dozens of emails over those years. Birthday wishes for Grandma's 80th and 81st birthdays. Holiday greetings with photos of my apartment and my life. News about my promotions, my achievements, the moments I wanted to share with the people who were supposed to love me. I had sent all of them to my parents' shared email address, the one the whole family used, asking them to pass along my love to Grandma. None of them had ever arrived. I excused myself and went to my old bedroom, closing the door firmly behind me. My laptop sat on the small desk by the window, and I opened it with hands that trembled slightly. I needed to understand what was happening. I needed proof. I logged into my email account and navigated to the settings. My heart was already pounding as I clicked on forwarding and pop IMAP. What I found there made my blood run cold. There was an active forwarding rule I had never created. All incoming emails to my account were being automatically copied to an address I recognised immediately, emma.newtonprivate@gmail.com. The rule had been created 5 years ago, shortly after I had visited home for Thanksgiving, and left my laptop open while I helped with dishes. My hands were shaking now as I clicked on filters. What I found was even worse. There were rules set up to automatically delete any emails I sent to my parents' shared address. Every message I had written to my family over the past 5 years had been intercepted and erased before anyone could read it. Someone had been systematically controlling my communication with my own family for half a decade. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. Emma had access to everything. Every email I received, every message I sent. She had been watching me while simultaneously erasing me from our family's awareness. The isolation I had felt, the growing distance, the sense that no one cared about my life in Cleveland. None of it had been accidental, it had been engineered. I needed air. I needed to think. I closed my laptop and walked downstairs, slipping out the back door onto the porch. The cold December air hit my face, and I breathed deeply, trying to calm the fury building in my chest. That's when I heard Emma's voice. She was standing around the corner of the house, hidden from view, but close enough that her words carried clearly in the still winter air. She was speaking into her phone in a low, urgent tone. "Everything's on track," she said. "The lawyer comes at 8 tonight. Once Mom and Dad sign, she can't legally contest anything. The will specifically states she's been uninvolved and contributed nothing to the family." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Then Emma laughed softly. "Yes, I know she's the one sending the money. I've known for years. But they don't know that. They still think it's Grandpa's pension. As far as Mum and Dad are concerned, Sabrina has never given this family a dime." Another pause. "Just keep the accounts clean until after New Year's. Then we're free." I pressed my back against the cold siding of the house, my heart hammering so loudly I was afraid she might hear it. Emma knew. She had known for years that I was the one sending $2,000 every month. She knew I had been supporting our parents while she told them I was too poor to help. And she was using that lie to steal my inheritance, to legally declare me worthless to my own family. Every instinct screamed at me to confront her right there, to grab her by the shoulders and demand to know why. But I forced myself to think strategically. If I accused Emma now, it would become my word against hers. She would cry, she would play the victim. Our parents would believe the daughter who had been managing their perceptions for years. I would look bitter and jealous, exactly the way Emma had painted me. No. I needed proof they couldn't deny. I slipped back inside and returned to my bedroom. For the next hour, I documented everything. I took screenshots of every forwarding rule, every filter that deleted my messages, every piece of evidence of unauthorized access to my account. I saved them to a secure folder and emailed copies to myself at work. Then, I noticed something I had missed before. A folder in my email I had never created, generated automatically by the forwarding system. It was labelled simply FW Sabrina Work. I clicked it open, and my breath caught in my throat. Inside were hundreds of my professional emails from the past 5 years. Every promotion announcement, every bonus notification, every achievement I had earned through years of hard work and sacrifice. Emma had been collecting them all, studying my career in detail, while telling our parents I was barely surviving. The most recent email, forwarded just last week, was my year-end bonus confirmation. $780,000. But it was the final message in the folder that made everything click into place. An email from 3 years ago, a bank notification about a recurring $2,000 transfer to the Newton household account. Emma had known for 3 years exactly who was supporting our family, and she had used that time to build her case to position herself as the only worthy daughter to write me out of my parents' will with lies she knew were lies. She had been planning this for a very long time, and tonight I was going to make sure her plan fell apart. The hours between my discovery and the evening gift exchange felt like years. I moved through the afternoon on autopilot, helping set the table, smiling at the right moments, playing the role of the invisible daughter they all expected me to be. But inside, I was steady, focused, ready. At 6 o'clock, the family gathered in the living room for the Christmas gift exchange. A fire crackled warmly in the fireplace. Soft holiday music played from speakers in the corner. The tree glittered with lights and ornaments, and wrapped presents sat in neat piles beneath its branches. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt like a stage set for a performance that had been rehearsed without my knowledge. My father cleared his throat and stood before the fireplace, assuming the position he always took when he had something important to say. My mother sat beside him on the arm of his chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. Emma and Marcus occupied the love seat, while Grandma Grace sat quietly in her corner chair near the window. I took my usual spot on the ottoman near the edge of the room, close enough to be present, but far enough to be forgotten. "Before we open presents," my father began, his voice carrying the weight of a man who believed he was being profound. "Your mother and I want to say something. This year, we've decided that gifts should go to those who have truly contributed to this family's success. We want to recognize achievement. We want to reward the people who make us proud." He reached behind the tree and produced a velvet jewelry box, which he presented to Emma with a flourish. "Emma, sweetheart, this is for you. For everything you've done for this family." Emma opened the box with theatrical surprise, even though I suspected she had helped pick out its contents. Inside was a diamond necklace that caught the firelight beautifully. She gasped and held it up for everyone to admire, then turned so Marcus could fasten it around her neck. My mother looked at me with a smile that was meant to seem kind, but landed as condescending. "We hope this inspires you, Sabrina. Maybe next year you'll have something to show for yourself. We all have potential. Sometimes we just need a little motivation to reach it." Emma admired her reflection in her phone's camera, adjusting the necklace so it caught the light just right. Then she turned to me with an expression of exaggerated sympathy. "Don't feel bad, sis. You can still watch us celebrate. That's nice too, right? Not everyone can be successful. Some people are meant to support from the sidelines." I said nothing. I simply watched and waited. Emma, basking in the attention, decided to extend her moment of glory. "Actually, since we're celebrating success, I want to share something with everyone." She grabbed the remote and connected her phone to the large television mounted above the fireplace. A moment later, her email inbox appeared on the screen, and she navigated to a message with obvious pride. "Look at this," she announced. "My year-end bonus, $8,000, and I've been promoted to senior coordinator." She beamed at our parents as if she had just announced she'd won the Nobel Prize. The email glowed on the screen, showing the modest bonus and her new title. Our parents applauded enthusiastically. My father nodded with approval. "This is exactly why Emma should handle family matters," he said. "She understands what success looks like. She knows how to earn her place." Emma soaked in the praise, then added casually, "You know, we should probably go ahead and sign those documents before the lawyer arrives. No need to wait until 8. Everything's ready, right? Let's just get it done." She was trying to accelerate her timeline, trying to lock everything in before anything could go wrong. I took a slow breath. This was the moment. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and pleasant, "I'd like to share something too, since we're celebrating family success." Emma's smile flickered for just a moment. My parents looked at me with polite confusion, clearly not expecting me to have anything worth showing. Before anyone could object or redirect the conversation, I stood and walked to the television. I disconnected Emma's phone and connected my own. My fingers were steady as I navigated to my email and opened the message I had prepared. The screen filled with words that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Year-end bonus confirmation, $785,000. Equity vest, $340,000. Effective January 1st, promotion to regional vice president. I let the numbers sink in for a moment before adding quietly, I also led my company's $2 billion acquisition this quarter. You might have seen it in the Wall Street Journal. It was on the front page of the business section. Complete silence. The fire crackled. The Christmas music played on, absurdly cheerful against the frozen shock in the room. Emma's face went grey. The diamond necklace around her neck suddenly looked cheap and small. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Marcus stared at the screen as if he was trying to make the numbers rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My parents looked at the television, then at me, then back at the television. They were staring at a stranger. Someone they didn't recognize. Someone who didn't match the story they had been told for years. My father's mouth opened and closed several times. My mother whispered, her voice barely audible. "But you do bookkeeping. Emma said you could barely pay your rent. She said..." In her corner chair, Grandma Grace allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Emma recovered first. Her voice came out high and desperate, cracking at the edges. "That's obviously fake. She photoshopped it. There's no way she could have numbers like that. She's lying to make me look bad. This is exactly what she does. She's always been jealous of me." I turned to face my sister, keeping my voice calm as ice. "Interesting reaction, Emma. Tell me something. How would you know what my real bonus should be?" I paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Unless you've been reading my work emails for the past 5 years. Emma's face went from grey to white. I reached for my phone again, my movement slow and deliberate. "Would you like me to show everyone the forwarding rules I found in my account settings, the ones automatically sending copies of every email I received to an address called emma.newtonprivate@gmail.com? The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the fire crackling, the soft music, still playing its cheerful holiday tunes, the wind pushing against the windows outside. But no one in that room made a sound. They were all staring at Emma, waiting for an explanation that could make sense of what I had just revealed. Emma's polished facade cracked before my eyes. She let out a nervous laugh that sounded more like a hiccup, her hands fluttering to her new diamond necklace, as if it could somehow protect her. "Okay, yes, I had access to your email," she admitted, her voice climbing higher with each word. "But it wasn't surveillance. That makes it sound so sinister. I was worried about you, Sabrina. You were living alone in Cleveland, struggling with that low-paying job. I wanted to make sure you were okay without bothering you. I was trying to look out for my big sister. It's not creepy, it's caring." She turned to our parents, her eyes filling with tears on command. I had seen her do this 1,000 times throughout our childhood. The instant victim, the misunderstood angel. "See how she twists everything? She's always been jealous of how close our family is. She moved away and barely kept in touch, and now she's trying to make me look bad because she's bitter. She can't stand that I stayed and built a life here while she ran away." My mother looked uncertain, caught between the daughters she had believed in for years and the evidence still glowing on the television screen. My father's brow was furrowed deeply, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile two incompatible realities. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough on its own. "Let's talk about family caring, Emma," I said calmly. 6 years ago, you called me in the middle of the night. You were sobbing so hard I could barely understand you. You owed $45,000. Credit card debt. A failed investment you were ashamed of. You begged me not to tell Mum and Dad. You said they would never look at you the same way if they knew. The colour drained from Emma's face. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly hearing this story for the first time. I pulled up the bank records I had saved on my phone and held the screen where everyone could see it. I transferred the money that week, $45,000, paid off everything so you wouldn't have to face the consequences. I never mentioned it again. Not to you, not to anyone. I thought that's what family does. We help each other without keeping score. I looked at my parents, who were staring at me with expressions of dawning horror. Did Emma ever tell you about that? Did she ever mention that her big sister, the one who supposedly can't even pay her own rent, bailed her out of a $45,000 hole? My mother's voice came out as barely a whisper. 45,000. Emma, is this true? My father looked between his daughters like a man trying to solve an impossible equation. The numbers didn't add up. The story he had believed for years was falling apart in front of him, and he didn't know how to make the pieces fit together anymore. Emma stammered, her rehearsed composure completely gone. That was different. The circumstances were complicated. It wasn't like she's making it sound. And I was going to pay her back eventually. I just needed time to get on my feet. Her excuses sounded hollow even to herself. I could see it in the way her voice trailed off, the way she couldn't meet anyone's eyes. The successful daughter narrative was crumbling in real time, and she had no idea how to rebuild it. That's when Grandma Grace spoke up. Her elderly voice was stronger than it had been in years, carrying across the room with quiet authority. There's more they need to know. She pushed herself up from her corner chair and stood with a dignity that commanded attention. She looked at my father and mother with an expression of profound disappointment mixed with determination. For 8 years, $2,000 has appeared in the household account every month, she said. You thought it was your father's pension, Patricia. You never questioned it. But your father's pension was only $800. I always wondered where the extra money came from. She turned to look at me, and I saw pride shining in her eyes. Last month, I finally traced the account. The money comes from Sabrina. She's been supporting this family anonymously for almost a decade. She routed it through your grandfather's old account, so you wouldn't feel embarrassed accepting help from your daughter. Grace paused to let the weight of her words sink in. Nearly $200,000 total. That's what the daughter you called unsuccessful has given to this family. The room went completely silent. My father sank into his chair like a man who had been physically struck. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, and something that looked like the beginning of shame. Marcus stared at Emma as if seeing her for the first time, and what he saw clearly disturbed him. Emma stood frozen, the diamond necklace glittering obscenely around her neck. A necklace bought, I now realised, with money I had sent to help our parents. Money she had convinced them came from a pension. Money she had used to prop up her image while tearing down mine. I looked directly at my sister, holding her gaze until she couldn't look away. You knew, I said, my voice hardening for the first time. I found the evidence in my forwarded emails. You traced that account 3 years ago. You've known for 3 years that I was the one sending money to support this family. Emma's lips moved, but no sound came out. You knew I was paying for everything, I continued, including the money that funded your coffee shop. The $80,000 Mum and Dad gave you came from my transfers. You built your business with my money while telling everyone I was worthless. I took a step toward her, watching her shrink back against the love seat. You watched me support this family for years while you told our parents I was a failure, while you planned to cut me out of the will entirely, while you prepared documents calling me negligent and uninvolved. My voice dropped to something cold and sharp. The question is, Emma, what else have you been hiding? Emma stood paralysed, unable to answer my question. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as years of carefully constructed lies began collapsing around her. I waited, letting the silence do its work, letting everyone in that room feel the weight of what was unfolding. My father spoke up weakly, grasping for something solid to hold on to, in a world that had suddenly become unstable. Wait, he said, his voice rough and uncertain. We gave Emma $80,000 for the coffee shop. That came from the household savings, from the pension account. His words slowed as the realization dawned on him. From the pension. Grandma Grace shook her head slowly, her expression a mixture of sadness and vindication. That money came from Sabrina's transfers, Richard. Every dollar of it. You gave Emma $80,000 of your older daughter's money to start a business that failed within a year. The words landed like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of shock across my parents' faces. My mother gripped the arm of the couch, her knuckles white. My father seemed to age 10 years in front of my eyes, the proud patriarch reduced to a confused old man who had just discovered he didn't understand his own family. But I wasn't finished. I had spent the afternoon doing more than just documenting Emma's email surveillance. I had done research. I had pulled records. I had found the proof I needed. "There's something else," I said, keeping my voice steady and factual. I pulled the coffee shop's public business filings and tax records. They're available to anyone who knows where to look. I opened the screenshots I had saved on my phone and held them up for everyone to see. The actual documented expenses for Emma's business, rent, equipment, inventory, payroll, everything reported to the IRS totaled $52,000 over the life of the business. I let that number sink in before continuing. "But, Emma," I said, turning to face my sister directly, "you showed Mum and Dad invoices and receipts claiming you needed $80,000. I have copies of both sets of numbers, the ones you filed with the government and the ones you showed our parents." Emma's face had gone completely white. Marcus was staring at her with an expression of dawning horror, like a man watching a stranger emerge from the skin of someone he thought he knew. "That's a $28,000 discrepancy," I continued. "Where did the fake invoices come from? Who created them? And more importantly, where did the extra money go?" For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled. The Christmas music had finally stopped leaving the room in heavy silence. Emma stood in the centre of it all, cornered and exposed with nowhere left to hide. And then something shifted in her face. The tearful victim act, the wounded innocent routine she had perfected over years of practice, simply fell away. What emerged from beneath it was something uglier, something bitter and sharp and desperately defensive. "So what?" Emma snapped, her voice suddenly hard and cold. "So what if I kept some money? I deserve it. I'm the one who stayed close to home. I'm the one who shows up for every holiday, every birthday, every family dinner. I'm the one who takes Mum to her doctor appointments. I'm the one who actually acts like a daughter instead of running away to Cleveland and pretending a check in the mail makes you family." She was shouting now, years of hidden resentment pouring out in a toxic flood. "You just sent money and thought that made you a good person. That made you better than me. Money isn't love. Sabrina, being here is love. Showing up is love. And I've been showing up for 10 years while you sat in your fancy office counting your precious bonuses." The room went silent again. Emma stood there breathing hard, her chest heaving, her face flushed with anger. She didn't seem to realize what she had just done. In her rage, in her desperation to justify herself, she had admitted everything. She had confessed to taking the money. She had confirmed the fraud. Marcus slowly stood up from the love seat and took a step away from Emma as if proximity to her might contaminate him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The distance spoke volumes. My mother started crying quietly. These weren't her usual tears, the ones she deployed strategically to end arguments or gain sympathy. These were tears of genuine shock and shame. "Emma," she whispered, her voice breaking. You knew Sabrina was successful. You knew she was supporting us all these years. And you lied. You made us treat her like she was nothing. You made us believe." She couldn't finish. She buried her face in her hands and wept. My father sat motionless in his chair, his face grey and slack. He stared at the floor as if searching for answers in the patterns of the carpet. He wasn't just learning that Emma had lied. He was realising something far worse. He was realising that he had been cruel to the wrong daughter for an entire decade. That he had withheld love and approval from the child who had quietly supported him while lavishing praise on the one who had been stealing from the family. And he had chosen not to see it. He had chosen to believe the comfortable lie instead of asking a single question. I looked around the room at my broken family, at Emma finally exposed, at Marcus already mentally planning his exit, at my parents drowning in the wreckage of their own willful blindness, at Grandma Grace who sat quietly in her corner with an expression of profound sadness, but also relief. The truth was finally out, but there was one more thing I needed to understand. I walked to where Emma's handbag sat on the floor and picked up the envelope that had fallen out that morning, the one with the law firm letterhead, the one with the words that had haunted me all day. "There's one more thing I need to understand," I said, holding up the envelope. I looked at Emma, then at my parents. "This document that you're planning to sign in," I checked my watch, 40 minutes. What exactly does it say? And why was Emma so desperate to have it signed before tonight? I began opening the envelope, sliding my finger under the sealed flap. Emma lunged forward, her face twisted with panic. "No, you can't do that. That's private legal documentation." She turned desperately to our parents. "Mum, Dad, tell her she can't read, that it's family business. She has no right." But our parents said nothing. They just watched as I pulled the document from the envelope and began to read. The document felt heavy in my hands, though it was only a few pages of legal paper. I unfolded it slowly, aware that everyone in the room was watching. Emma had stopped lunging toward me and now stood frozen, her face a mask of terror. She knew what was coming. She had written these words herself, or at least dictated them to a lawyer who didn't ask questions. I began reading aloud, my voice clear and steady. "Last Will and Testament revised draft. Sole beneficiary Emma Marie Newton. All property, savings and assets totaling approximately $550,000. I paused to let that number settle into the room. $500,000. Everything my parents had worked for their entire lives. Every penny they had saved, including the money I had been sending them for nearly a decade. All of it designated for Emma alone. Then I continued to the justification clause and my voice went cold. "This distribution reflects the following considerations." I read each word slowly, making sure no one could miss a single syllable. "Sabrina Newton has demonstrated no financial contribution to the family, has repeatedly refused requests for financial assistance, and has shown complete disregard for family welfare during times of need." I lowered the document and looked around the room. My mother had stopped crying. My father had finally lifted his eyes from the floor. They were both staring at me with expressions of absolute horror. "That was going to be legally filed," I said quietly. "A permanent record. Every single word of it, a deliberate lie." I held up the document so everyone could see it clearly. "Let me make sure everyone understands exactly what this represents. I have given this family nearly $200,000 over 8 years. I paid off Emma's $45,000 debt without being asked, and without ever mentioning it again. I never refused any request for help, because no one ever asked me directly. Emma made sure of that. She controlled every communication. She blocked every message. She made certain that I never had the chance to say yes. My voice hardened as I continued. "And this document that Emma was going to have you sign tonight would have legally declared that I am a selfish deadbeat who abandoned her family. It would have locked me out of any inheritance. It would have eliminated any legal recourse I might have had. It would have erased any connection to this family forever." I let the pages fall to my side, all based on lies that Emma spent 5 years constructing. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of the betrayal hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Then Emma shattered. "You don't understand," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You have no idea what it's been like for me. Do you know what it feels like to live in your shadow? Ever since we were children, it was always Sabrina this and Sabrina that. Sabrina's so smart. Sabrina's so capable. Sabrina has such potential." She was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark rivers, her carefully styled hair falling into her face. I had to fight for every scrap of attention in this family, If I didn't control things, I would have been nothing. I would have been invisible, just like you made me feel for my entire childhood. She collapsed onto the love seat, weeping uncontrollably. Her words hung in the air, revealing the twisted logic that had driven years of manipulation and lies. In her mind, she was the victim. She had convinced herself that stealing from me, lying about me, erasing me from my own family was somehow justified. That she deserved everything she had taken because she had suffered the unbearable crime of having a capable older sister. I felt nothing but pity, and something close to disgust. Movement caught my eye from the corner of the room. Marcus, who had been silent throughout this entire confrontation, slowly rose from where he had been standing against the wall. He looked at Emma with an expression I will never forget. It was the look of a man staring at a complete stranger. Someone he had never truly known at all. "I thought I knew you," he said quietly. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "I was going to propose this week. I had a ring. I had a whole plan for New Year's Eve." He shook his head slowly as if trying to clear away a fog. "I don't know who you are. I don't think I ever did." Emma looked up from her sobbing, her face a ruin of smeared makeup and desperate hope. "Marcus, wait. Please, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. She's twisting everything. She's always been jealous of me. Please, Marcus, please." But Marcus was already picking up his jacket from the back of a chair. He didn't respond to her pleas. He didn't even look at her again. He simply walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold December night. The door closed softly behind him with a click that sounded louder than any slam could have. Emma called his name once more, her voice breaking on the syllables. But he was gone. And with him went the future she had been building her entire deception around. The successful boyfriend, the pending proposal, the picture of perfect life that would have completed her image as the worthy daughter. In the heavy silence that followed, Grandma Grace slowly rose from her corner chair. Despite her 82 years, despite the frailty that had worried me when I first arrived, she stood with a dignity and strength that commanded the entire room. She looked at my father and mother with an expression of profound disappointment. The disappointment of a mother who had raised a child to be better than this, watching him fail in ways she never imagined. "You will not sign that document," she said firmly. "Not tonight, not ever." Then she turned to me and took my hand in both of hers. Her grip was warm and steady, her eyes were clear. "I've made my choice about where I belong," she said softly. "Whatever you decide to do now, I'm with you." Grandma Grace's hand felt warm and steady in mine. Her words echoed in the silent room, a declaration of loyalty that meant more to me than anything my parents could have offered. I squeezed her hand gently, then turned to face what remained of my family. The living room looked like a battlefield after the fighting had stopped. Emma sat crumpled on the floor near the hallway, where Marcus had walked out, her designer dress wrinkled, her perfect image shattered. My parents sat on opposite ends of the couch, unable to look at each other or at me. I stood before them, calm and clear. "I'm ending all financial support to this household," I said. My voice carried no cruelty, only finality. Not as revenge, but because I've spent 10 years pouring resources into a family that treated me as invisible. That ends tonight. I placed the printed bank statements on the coffee table. 8 years of monthly transfers. This is what the failure daughter contributed while you were planning to legally declare I gave nothing. $192,000. I don't need your apology. I just need you to finally see the truth. Then I turned to Emma. She looked up at me from the floor with red-rimmed eyes. "What you did, accessing my email accounts without authorization for 5 years, is a federal crime," I said. "The falsified invoices for the coffee shop constitute fraud. And this," I held up the will document, "is evidence of attempted inheritance fraud. You were manipulating elderly parents to sign documents based on deliberate lies. Emma's face went pale. I'm not going to press charges tonight, but I have documented everything. If you ever access my accounts again, if you ever try to contact me, if you ever attempt to manipulate anyone I care about, I will pursue every legal option available. Federal email crimes carry up to 5 years in prison. I paused. Are we clear? Emma nodded weakly. My father made one last attempt, his voice hoarse. Sabrina, please. We're still family. We can work through this. I shook my head gently but firmly. Family doesn't do what was done here, Dad. For 10 years, you chose to believe the worst about me without ever asking a single question. You were going to sign a legal document calling me selfish and negligent, and you didn't think to verify any of it. My mother was crying silently into her hands. I don't hate you, I said, but I can't keep trying to earn love from people who refuse to see me. That's work you'll have to do yourselves. I turned to Grandma Grace and everything about me softened. Grandma, I have a spare bedroom in Cleveland. It has a window overlooking a small garden. There's a senior centre nearby with art classes and a book club. I took her weathered hands in mine. Would you like to come home with me? Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, really smiling. My dear girl, she said, I've been hoping you would ask. We packed her things that night. My parents didn't try to stop us. By dawn, we were ready to leave. Grey morning light filtered through the clouds as I helped Grandma Grace into my car. A light snow had been falling, covering the lawn in white, making the Newton house look like a Christmas card. Beautiful on the surface, hollow underneath. I paused and looked back one final time. Through the living room window, I could see Emma still sitting on the floor alone. The Christmas tree lights still blinked absurdly. My parents were nowhere in sight. I waited for triumph to come, for the satisfaction of revenge. But what I felt instead was simpler and more profound. Release. The weight of a decade of trying to be seen, of sending money into a void, of hoping each Christmas would be different, lifted from my shoulders and dissolved into the snowy air. I got in the car. Grace squeezed my hand from the passenger seat. Are you all right, dear? She asked softly. My phone buzzed. A work email confirming my promotion to regional vice president effective January 1st. I glanced at it and put the phone away. I didn't need to show anyone. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I looked at the road ahead. Clear and open. Mine to navigate. I am Grandma. A genuine smile crossed my face. For the first time in a very long time, I really am. Sabrina spent 10 years being invisible to the people who should have loved her most. She drove hours to attend family gatherings where no one asked about her life. She sent nearly $200,000 to support a household that called her a failure. She paid off her sister's $45,000 debt without ever mentioning it again. She watched from the sidelines as her parents showered praise on Emma while dismissing her as someone who would never amount to anything. And what did she receive in return? Her sister hacked her email for 5 years. Her communications with her family were blocked and deleted. Her achievements were hidden. Her contributions were erased. And when Christmas came, her own parents announced that gifts were only for successful children, while Emma smirked and told her she could watch from the sidelines. But the truth has a way of coming out. And when it did, Sabrina didn't scream. She didn't beg for their approval. She didn't seek petty revenge. She simply stopped hiding. She connected her phone to that television and showed them exactly who she was. A woman who had built a career they never bothered to ask about. A woman whose bonus was nearly 100 times what her sister earned. A woman who had been carrying her family financially while they planned to legally declare she had never contributed anything. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. Sometimes family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about the people who choose to stand beside you when everything falls apart. For Sabrina, that person was Grandma Grace, the only one who ever truly saw her. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story. We share new stories every week about strength, justice, and the power of truth. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by people who should have believed in you? Have you ever given everything to someone who refused to see your worth? How did you finally prove them wrong? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. You are not alone.